We'll start now. Thank you, Siddharth, for giving us this time. I think most of the people who are here were also here yesterday, so this is slightly more informal, and we use the opportunity to, in a sense, have a chat, basically. But I would like to go into a little bit more detail about some of the things which we weren't able to cover yesterday. I think you all know Siddharth Varadarajan, former editor of The Hindu, founder editor of The Wire, and in our estimation, one of the bravest journalists around, certainly in our part of the world. And The Wire has played a very, very important role in India. We're jealous in some ways because we've tried to do that with Drik News and not been as successful. Hopefully, we'll overcome that. I would like to take this opportunity to go into further detail on some of the things that were discussed yesterday. You had mentioned 4 principal points that journalists should adhere to in order to be able to survive. One of them was that the reporting should be of high quality and there be no mistakes. I would like to refer to the situation on 31st of March 2020, when The Wire had published a news report on Ram Navami Fair being conducted amidst the coronavirus pandemic at Uttar Pradesh. The report had misattributed, from what I know, a quote to the Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath. I'm not sure if I'm getting it right. And the paragraph it contained was tweeted by you. The following day, the report was corrected. You yourself issued a clarification attributing the quote to the Hindutva stalwart Acharya Paramhans. That didn't stop there. That went much further, and it got The Wire into trouble. Perhaps you could discuss that. One of the things we have wondered at that situation, and perhaps you have an insight into that, was whether The Wire had actually fallen into a trap, whether this was a setup. I mean, those are things that do happen in our part of the world. We don't know, but it would be interesting to hear from you.
No, this was not a setup. This was a kind of genuine mistake. While kind of curating a copy based on information that was drawn from reliable sources online and from other reported things. This was actually a very small part of the story. The story in question was about the targeting of the Tablighi Jamaat. If you go back to March 2020, when the coronavirus was just beginning to make its presence felt, and the government had announced a lockdown, comprehensive lockdown without any warning, and there were guidelines in place. And in order to somehow justify the action being taken, which was deeply unpopular, the online disinformation system linked to the ruling party created this whole scare that the Tablighi Jamaat convention, which was held in Nizamuddin in Delhi, was a super spreading event. And that you had all these Tablighis who were leaving that event, who were then carrying the virus to other parts of India. The implication, not so subtle and often actually explicitly spelled out by some individuals, was that Muslims are spreading COVID. And the right-wing channels, which are the biggest channels, coined the term Corona Jihad. Right, so this is the context in which we were reporting on these restrictions, and the story was actually noting the irony of the government going hammer and tongs against the Tablighi Jamaat on the one hand and imposing these restrictions, insisting on social distancing and so on and so forth, wearing masks, while at the same time the Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister and the UP government was insisting that the Ram Navami event at Ayodhya will carry on as previously announced. So the story was actually the double standard involved in the Modi government nationally saying that there will be these restrictions and then targeting Muslims for allegedly violating those restrictions, even as the Uttar Pradesh government under Yogi Adityanath was going ahead with this Hindu event, despite all the fears. And subsequently, in fact, the Chief Minister himself turned up at one of the prayers, I think on March 25th or 26th, where he was in a group of 50 or 60 people. Complete, blatant violation of the norms that there would be no gatherings, no public gatherings. Many people weren't even wearing masks. So the story pointed this out, and somewhere down the line, this one quote that Ram will save you, which was by a prominent Hindutva saint, got misattributed for a few hours to Adityanath, and I tweeted that. And when it was pointed out, we corrected it. The Uttar Pradesh official who pointed this out got very upset that I had not deleted the earlier tweet, even though we had, there's a debate on this as to whether because deleting something also could amount in a legal situation as an attempt to destroy evidence. So our policy generally has been that you clarify below that, which many people follow. So there's the historical record, it's not tampered with, and you set the record straight. But they went and filed this case, and what was interesting was that they filed two cases against me personally, one in Ayodhya, one in Faizabad. And around the 10th of April, I wasn't at home at the time, but 2 jeep loads of policemen landed up at our place. And my wife told them that I wasn't there, and they didn't want to leave, but eventually they left. But they had come all the way from Ayodhya. And there's no doubt in my wife's mind or in the mind of our lawyer that had I been there, they definitely would have driven me all the way back to, and this is in the middle of COVID. They would have driven me to Ayodhya and charged me, and I would have had to have spent a few days in jail before getting bail. So we were able to, since I wasn't there, we were able to forestall this process, and then of course there was a lot of protest internationally at this misuse of police power. So yeah, so this is a good instance of where a careless error. I'm not sure. I wonder if it was in the story itself or in my tweet. Maybe I misread the story and tweeted. I forget the details now. But a careless error can have consequences of this kind because the state is simply looking to pounce on you. And so this is an issue, and I would say that it served as a kind of reminder that you do not take things lightly. Of course, it's a different matter that you're dealing with a state that is out to get you any which way. So there are examples of perfectly factual stories. After this, there were cases filed against us in UP. One, there was a story. There was an elderly Muslim gentleman who was abducted on the road somewhere in Ghaziabad near Delhi by a gang of lumpens, and taken to some kind of secluded location where they where they basically beat him and taunted him. And there was a video released where they were pulling his beard. And this gentleman later gave an interview narrating what had happened. He was shell-shocked. And he also said that one of the things that these goons were making him do was to insist that he said Jai Shri Ram. And so many people reported this based on the video interview of the victim. So did we. Many people tweeted. There was a story broke on Twitter, say around 11 or 12 in the day. By the evening, there were literally thousands of tweets by politicians, by journalists, by lay people, criticizing the targeting of this gentleman and calling on the UP police to take action and saying what kind of Gunda Raj is there in UP and so on and so forth. So kind of embarrassed by this incident and the coverage that it was getting, the UP government decided to crack down on social media tweets. So they kind of swung in and arrested a bunch of guys. And they said, these are the guys who did it. And among the people they arrested were 2 or 3 Muslims also. So there was a kind of gang of 10 thugs, among whom they said there were 3 or 4 Muslims. And this, the police claimed, was proof that the incident was not communal, that the man was not targeted for being a Muslim. And they used that then as a pretext to file criminal cases against some individuals for having tweeted about this crime. And it's interesting that of the thousands of people who had tweeted, the police in Ghaziabad filed their criminal charges against, I think, 6 individuals, all of whom were Muslim, and against the wire. And a completely rubbish case, because all of us had tweeted or reported based on what the victim himself was saying. And the victim clearly was interviewed saying, and you could see his beard being pulled in the video that the bad guys had shot. And the victim is saying he would say, "Unhone Jai Shri Ram kehlwaya tha." And that's what our story said. And it doesn't matter whom the police arrests or whether they're Muslims or not. The factual account given by the victim has to be reported. And at the time that we reported it, the police had no version. So from a journalistic point of view, the story was impeccable. Yet the police went and filed this case, amazingly under Section 153. Perhaps it's the same section of the criminal code in Bangladesh, which is of inciting communal hatred. So you're doing a story on a victim of a communal crime, and you get accused of inciting communal hatred. So, there's no telling where and how the cops will act. And of course, it helped that the story was factually unimpeachable. So there's nothing, nothing has come out of that case. But, these things linger and can be used at any time to harass, journalists. Of the fact checker Mohammed Zubair, for example, who, is probably very, very high up, maybe number 1 in their hate list, because he debunks their false claims online within minutes of them making them. So the Hindutva right wing will circulate a video, say from Bangladesh, and say that. In fact, I remember one from there was a video of maybe 2 political factions having a fight, say in Khulna or someplace in some Bangladeshi town. And there was this video of a guy, a very Islamic-looking guy, brutally beating another fellow who was wearing a pant and shirt. And this was a Bangladeshi political clash. It had nothing to do with India. But the right wing circulated this video saying that, look what Muslims are doing in Ranchi. And this kind of video, it circulates on WhatsApp. You can intervene only if you see it in publicly visible social media like Twitter or Facebook. Then Mohammed Zubair of Alt News or people like him can say, look, this is rubbish. And then they produce the original video from Bangladesh of 4 years ago and say this has nothing to do with India. It has nothing to do with religion. But when it circulates privately through WhatsApp or email, then you have no control over this, right? So this is the terrain. And the police went and filed, not in this particular instance, but I'm forgetting what the trigger was, but they filed a really silly case against Mohammed Zubair. And when he was on the verge of getting bail for that case, the Uttar Pradesh police then, so there was, when Israel was attacking Gaza the last time, and had also targeted, they were bombing Gaza. One of the horrible right-wing channels, I mentioned it yesterday, Sudarshan News, had done a news program where they showed an animated image of missiles hitting the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This was their way of depicting Israel's attack on Gaza. And in fact, the mosque they claimed was Al-Aqsa was actually the Medina. I mean, it was a complete, amateurish, stupid, fake graphic that they made. And Zubair pointed this out on Twitter. And the TV channel, instead of correcting it and, being legally vulnerable itself, they went and filed a case against Zubair. I don't know what absurd charge they leveled, but when Zubair you remember that incident? What was the charge? That's right, exactly. I got it. So the original case on which they got him, thank you. So there's a Hindi movie scene where a couple are going to a hotel, and it says, yeah, it's Hanuman, but the Hanuman somebody had changed into honeymoon. And this is from a Hindi film that was shown in the 70s. And the Hindutva guy said, oh, this is a Muslim guy, and he is insulting Hanumanji. So they tried to file, communal incitement charges against him. So that was the original case on which they arrested him. And when it got exposed very quickly that this is not a clip that Zubair made, this is a Bollywood clip from one of Basu Bhattacharya's movies. So then they realized that this guy is bound to get bail. So then they fabricated all these other silly cases. And there was a time when I think there were 4 sequential attempts to arrest him. So finally the Supreme Court had to intervene, but he was still in jail for 13 days. Right? So this is you're dealing with a state and a regime that's looking to get you any which way. So you can't afford mistakes, but not making mistakes is no guarantee that they won't come and get you.
And of course, we have the typical situation of shooting the messenger in all these cases. But you just mentioned Israel briefly, and I'd like to take that opportunity because the Red Ink Award that you won, I think in 2022, was for your work on Pegasus. We've been since found out that Pegasus has been used by Bangladesh as well. And while the government has recently made a statement in solidarity with Gaza, the fact that surveillance is so pervasive here, the fact that Pegasus is being used, the fact that our security forces have been trained by Israel are all part of something which goes under the carpet. Could you tell us more about your Pegasus research and what we should be looking out for?
So I'll clarify that. So the award, Red Ink Award, kind of was given to me individually because that's the way those awards work. But it was actually a team. It was part of a team. There were 8 of us at The Wire who worked on this project. And we ourselves worked on it as part of the wider Pegasus project, which was a collaboration between 15 international media organizations. The Wire was the Indian partner. But the whole project began with a French NGO, Forbidden Stories, getting access to leaked records of basically a list of phone numbers from around the world of people who were likely targets of Pegasus based on the provenance of the data. And essentially, the reporting consisted of trying to figure out who these numbers belong to, which is harder than you would imagine, because you can't simply, it's not simply a question of picking up the phone, dialing the number and saying, who are you? You have to figure, we did that in some cases, but it required trying to triangulate and identify numbers and then try to understand why somebody might be targeted. And then the next step, once we were able to identify somebody whose number was on that list, was to try to convince them to allow us to do a forensic examination of their phone. Because Amnesty International's tech lab, security lab, was collaborating as part of the project. And they had the capability to look at the system files and positively identify if Pegasus was used to target a phone, whether the targeting was successful, how much data was exfiltrated or infiltrated, so on and so forth. That exercise is easier to do for an iPhone, much harder when it comes to Android. Unfortunately, in India, Androids are very, very common. So anybody with an Android phone, we were not really in the position to comprehensively test their phones. And many people who were on our list were unwilling to have their phones examined because of the political sensitivity or the lack of trust. I mean, a prominent businessman who we didn't know personally, but who was on that list, is hardly likely to surrender his phone, so that we, in his mind, they would go through all his SMSs and WhatsApps, and although that's not how the testing process works, but anyway. So we were able to kind of establish, to prove forensically that Pegasus had been used around a dozen phones had been infected with Pegasus. And this included 4 or 5 journalists. It included opposition political figures. In fact, Renuma and I were talking about Prashant Kishore earlier. So this is a major opposition party strategist who, as it turned out when we investigated his phone, had Pegasus implanted and activated in the middle of the West Bengal state election that he was, the campaign for which he was leading on behalf of Mamata Banerjee against the BJP. And now it should be very clear to you that this has Watergate written all over it, right? This is the use of surveillance and spyware paid for with public money, because Israel says it only sells Pegasus to states, to state government entities. So an Indian state government entity bought Pegasus. An Indian state entity used Pegasus. And they used it against, among others, Prashant Kishore, who is an opposition person. And they did so in the middle of an election in which Narendra Modi was campaigning for the BJP. And I cannot think of, in fact, this is much, much worse than what Richard Nixon was accused of doing. Because in the Watergate scandal, you had a break-in at the Democratic Party offices at the Watergate Hotel, and the sort of placing of surveillance of bugs. It's not clear. In fact, it was never alleged that any of that activity, it was illegal, of course, but it was never alleged that any of this activity was done with state funds or using state personnel. Whereas in India, Pegasus has been bought with public money and is operated by public officials, intelligence officials. So to my mind, it's a crime much worse than Watergate. But if in America it led to the resignation of Nixon, here the best that we could manage to do, not the wire, because we didn't, we took a view that, look, our job is to report. And so we reported our findings and placed them in the public domain. And then public-spirited citizens, there were maybe a dozen of them, use these findings to then go to the Supreme Court. And we, of course, covered that. So there were these petitions filed, and the matter was heard in the Supreme Court. And the court asked the government, look, have you bought and used Pegasus? And the government said, we will not answer that question on security grounds. And the court then set up a committee to examine the evidence that had been marshaled. And the government was told that you will cooperate with this committee. The committee took about a year to submit its findings. It examined some of our phones and submitted its report in a sealed cover to the Supreme Court. I'm talking now, they gave their report maybe in 2023. Beginning of 23. Or maybe beginning of, 22. They took about a year. So it will be beginning of 23. And they concluded, according to the Chief Justice at the time, that they found the presence of malware in 2 or 3 phones. And they couldn't say positively whether this malware was Pegasus because they don't have that domain knowledge. But they also recorded the fact that the government refused to cooperate. Now, this should have triggered a contempt of court charge by the Chief Justice of India against the government, because having ordered them to cooperate, they didn't cooperate. But the Chief Justice sadly read out some parts of the committee's report and then said, we will come back to this later. He first promised to make the report public, but then he never did that. And it's been a year and a half since. There's been no further hearing, despite the fact that last year there was additional evidence, this time from Apple, of Pegasus still being used. So, I was again I was a victim in the first round, and my phone was targeted in this round the information which came out in the public domain last year. So one just assumes that the phone is compromised, and you live with it, because even though you periodically test your phone, but there's no guarantee that technology has not gone ahead. In Bangladesh, I've seen stories in the Haaretz. I'm not sure it's maybe Pegasus or new avatars like Predator, but yes, Israel is definitely selling spyware to the Bangladesh government. And this is quite unusual because officially the two governments don't see eye to eye. Bangladesh is, I was reading a very good statement Bangladesh submitted to the ICJ on the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories. And so, it's unusual, but I suppose, money has to be made, and the Israeli companies are doing that. And I think it's fair to assume that if you're a journalist, or you are a human rights defender, or an activist working in the cause of workers and peasants, women, it's fair to assume that you will be the target of government surveillance. And learning how to live with that and deal with that is the challenge. And you can't stop doing what you're doing. The government would love it if, out of the fear of surveillance, we just stop doing the journalism that we do, but we can't do that. So this has been an experience. But the Pegasus project, it was wonderful for us because it worked so well precisely because 15 media organizations around the world collaborated. So we were able to crack this and work together and do our stories in a coordinated fashion. And it had maximum global impact because these stories were being reported. So in India, the prominent targets included Rahul Gandhi, Prashant Kishore, a former election commissioner, Ashok Lavasa, who was the only election commissioner at the time to dissent on issues that matter to the government. There was even a young woman in the Pegasus list who had been a Supreme Court employee and who had complained and subsequently been sacked had complained against the Chief Justice of India at the time, Ranjan Gogoi, of sexual harassment, exactly. And so she made that complaint, she was sacked, and at some point the system must have got paranoid about her going public. So they put Pegasus on her phone, on the phone of her husband, on the phone of her brother-in-laws, two brother-in-laws. We identified a total of 4 or 5 phones connected to this young woman, which were the subject of Pegasus. So and human rights defenders in Kashmir, human rights defenders in Punjab, Tamil Nadu, have across the board been, and of course a lot of business people, and then some kind of inexplicable names. Like we found the name of a gentleman called Ashwini Vaishnav, who at the time that he was targeted was a businessman in Odisha. Today he's India's IT minister. He's joined the BJP and he's the IT minister. And of course he denies that any Pegasus is being used, but I'm sure he read our stories with a great deal of interest and then did all he could to cleanse his phones.
Well, that brings us. Oh yeah, there's a funny story. Kabir, who was there with us yesterday, I mean, we know that our phones get tapped, whatever. So he got a call at the end of a conversation saying, "Sir, could you please repeat that last bit? I didn't quite get it." So that's the world we live in. Now, you're from India, we're from Bangladesh, and there has been, I mean, there's a lot of history between our countries from the Liberation War and all the things that have happened. But in the many years since then, some of the concerns in Bangladesh have had to do with India-Bangladesh relationship. I mean, there is the issue of transit, water sharing, the BDR revolt, according to many, and certainly in a recent report by one of the people in the investigating committee, clearly implicates Indian involvement in that. There are the border killings that have been going on for so long. There are stories about Indians, top-ranking Indians, or white-collar Indians working in Bangladesh. All of those has led to resentment, and today we have a boycott India movement in Bangladesh, which is on the rise. We have tried to reach out to prominent Indians to get them to question India's foreign policy towards Bangladesh. We found it very, very difficult, and people who would otherwise we would expect to take a strong position have actually said that, you know, it's too dangerous for us. We don't want to touch it. And I was just checking. We put up a petition, and I see now that the petition cannot be accessed. But there is this general environment of fear where people who have otherwise spoken very strongly are now much more reticent and scared of responding. I was having a show in Göttingen during Documenta 15, and Danitha Singh was on the floor below. I was on the floor above. And we were talking generally, and she was saying, and you mentioned this yesterday about demolition, and she was saying that the equation had changed once demolition came into place. And suddenly, a lot of people who might otherwise have been vocal have been silenced. And in a sense, demolition was a watershed before and after. This thing about collective punishment, of course, it's being practiced by Israel, but in India, that seems to have had huge effects. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah. So I'm going to separate out, I mean, you raised 2 or 3 issues. One to do with Indo-Bangla ties and the public perception of those relations in India, as well as the perception of, shall we say, liberal or civil society. And secondly, the use of extra-legal measures like house demolition as a form of silencing people and as a form of collective punishment. The two are not linked directly, but I would say that the perception on India-Bangla or India-Bangladesh ties is fueled, or the inability or lack of discussion, critical commentary that we see in India is fueled less by fear and more by ignorance. There is not a great deal of reporting that goes on about what's happening in Bangladesh. Certainly, there are no Indian correspondents, and there is scant coverage. And there's a tendency to look at the neighborhood through the lens of Indian foreign policy. And there, many liberals also get confused by the fact that an otherwise pretty ham-handed South Asia policy, like Narendra Modi is often criticized for alienating India's neighbors and so on and so forth. And even Modi's critics, political critics, for example, when they list out how he's messed up relations with the Maldives and Nepal and so on and so forth, they often say, well, Bangladesh is the one bright spot because India-Bangladesh relations are really good. And people sort of uncritically say, okay, yeah, maybe this is a success story. Maybe there's no reason for us to dig deeper and to speak about this. What they don't realize, of course, is that this success story is a superficial one, right? So it's not enough to have good relations between two governments, but that relationship has to also reflect the sentiment of people. And in a situation where there is a disconnect between the people and the government, it's perhaps not so good for Indian foreign policy to be seen as excessively close to the government, right? So these are all nuances that simply because of lack of reporting and sadly lack of interest even in India's neighbors, that there is an unwillingness to comment. So people basically are afraid to comment on things that they don't really closely follow. I would say that, I mean, this is something that we should jointly work on to increase public perceptions, improve public perceptions of what's happening in Bangladesh. And I dare say the more reporting there is, the greater will be the likelihood, I think, for people to speak out on this. And I think this is something that's kind of remediable at a certain level. I don't think fear is too much of a factor, because fear hasn't stopped people from criticizing Modi's handling of the Maldives, say, or his handling of Nepal, or his handling of China, or other Gaza, very shameful Indian stand on Israeli aggression and genocidal actions in Gaza. So there's a lot of criticism of Modi for that. So fear isn't that much of a factor. I would say it's more just lack of knowledge. But on the question of demolitions, collective punishments, this is a great example of how Israeli techniques of crowd control and of humiliating your opponents and of totally crushing any resistance have been embraced and adopted by the Indian state. We saw another example on the Punjab-Haryana border when the police used drones to drop tear gas onto peaceful protesters. So these are all Israeli techniques, or using different kinds of rubber bullets and so on, which has been done, pellets in Kashmir. So these Israeli tactics have been there for some time. And house demolition is the latest import from Israel that we began to see used for the first time, say, 2 years ago in Madhya Pradesh and in Uttar Pradesh, and now is unfortunately quite common. And the form it takes is that an individual could be accused of some crime that brings that has public visibility, and often these are imaginary crimes actually. I forget the name of the town in Madhya Pradesh, but there was a Hindu procession that was passing by a Muslim locality, and some mischievous elements circulated a video of what looked like Muslim boys from a balcony spitting down on the crowd. If you looked at the video, the same video from different angles, it was clear they were doing nothing of the sort. But this became a big issue. That, oh, look at these Muslims spitting on the Hindus, etc., and cases were registered. And eventually this led to the demolition of the dwellings of 2 or 3 families. Completely illegal in law, because there's nothing in the Indian Penal Code that allows the police to demolish a house as part of punishment. Punishments are either jail or fine or both. That's it. In some cases, you could be like, the magistrate has the right to extern somebody from a district, but nowhere in any provision of law can you demolish a house. Houses can be demolished only by the municipality pursuant to building code violations. And again, there's a prescribed process of issuing notice and so on and so forth. So of course, the government, to cover its tracks, you had the politicians on the one hand saying publicly, we are not going to spare any of these rioters, we're going to demolish all their houses. So the politician is openly saying that these guys are being punished, and their homes are being demolished as a form of punishment. The police, on the other hand, would say that no, this house was demolished because there was XYZ building violation, and this is the reason why the municipality. So we saw this in Uttar Pradesh, where there were protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act. And one of these protests turned violent. It's not clear whether it turned violent because the police used pressure on them and tried to block them, or for whatever reason. But the Uttar Pradesh government decided, they settled in on one guy and said he's the mastermind. And even though the house belonged to his wife and was not an encroachment, they went and demolished it. And as the process was on, he rushed to the court, I think the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court basically refused to intervene. And even now, when it's clear, there's maybe, I think Amnesty's done a whole report on this now. There's maybe 200 examples from around the country of homes that have been demolished. So it's a very clear pattern. But even now, the courts are unwilling to say that this is an unacceptable form. And of course, this is collective punishment because sometimes it's an individual house. But don't forget that even if the law says that Shahidul Bhai's house can be demolished, but you're also then destroying the dwelling of the rest of his family. And we saw in the case of violence in Mewat, in Nuh, in Haryana last year. This is a predominantly Muslim town where Hindutva fanatics decided as a form of provocation that they would stage a kind of rally through a particular area. And they announced beforehand that a Hindutva fugitive, this is a guy called Monu Manesar, who was wanted for murder for having killed a Muslim guy in the name of cow slaughter or whatever. They said he would be present in the town. And so this was a way of aggravating. So you had a situation where Muslim lumpens also gathered, and there was a fight between these Muslim lumpens and the Hindutva processionists, and people got injured, some policemen got injured. And as retribution, the Haryana authorities demolished literally dozens of buildings. And that was the clearest form of kind of collective punishment on a mass scale. When the matter went to the Punjab and Haryana High Court, the judge who initially heard the case, in fact, he took it up suo moto. And he said that this is not on, this is unacceptable. And that the state cannot act like this. And of course, the case got removed from, got taken away from his bench and reassigned, and there hasn't been a second hearing. So the greatest, shame is not just that demolition as a form of punishment has now become a standard thing in India, but that the courts are refusing to take a stand against something that's manifestly illegal.
That's a problem we ourselves have had. I mean, of course.
Is demolitions happening here too?
Not demolitions as such, but certainly the court not taking the position or not protecting the public is a serious issue. I mean, the institutions have largely been damaged. We will open this up to question and answers soon. There are two things I wanted to bring up at this point. There was a reference to sexual harassment. There was a story about sexual harassment regarding Tehelka, which of course became very big. But Tehelka, quite apart from that, was very seriously targeted. And this was pre-BJP, from what I remember. So it's not simply the BJP that is doing it, it's the state that's doing the government.
In the case of Tehelka, actually, Tehelka first began operating, I think, when Rajshahi was the prime minister. So that was BJP. So it wasn't Modi, but it was Rajshahi. And Tehelka in that avatar, when it was a magazine, I think it was a broadsheet, a kind of tabloid, it got shut down the first time around because the Rajshahi government unleashed, they were very upset with the story that Tehelka had done, exposing they did a kind of sting operation to show there was corruption in arms dealing. And what the Rajshahi government did is that it unleashed the full might of the income tax and enforcement directorate authorities on the promoters of Tehelka, the people who had funded it, and basically ran them out of business. So Tehelka was shut down, and they were clearly a victim of state. This is not to say that non-BJP governments are not anti-media, but in terms of taking it to this extent, that was the first example we saw of media being shut down through punitive action after a story that they did. And now, of course, there are more examples. The sexual harassment, the case, that happened, that wasn't linked to politics in any way. even though the editor at the time tried to suggest that he was being victimized, quote unquote, because of his opposition to the BJP. But the fact is that he was accused of sexual molestation and rape by an employee. And the matter went to court. Actually, the trial court acquitted the editor, and the matter is now in appeal. So that's where that particular case rests.
Okay. Well, before I turn it over, I just want to bring in one thing which I think relates to both countries. In India, in particular, civil society is being targeted, and particularly funding is something that has been withdrawn. Amnesty certainly had a difficult time. Media as well. I mean, BBC, after its report, found it very difficult to operate. In Bangladesh, the NGO Bureau has almost complete control of the NGOs through control of funding and regulating what can be done, what cannot be done. So we have the state operating on the media, the state operating on civil society as well, and it seems to be a pattern that both countries are following. How have civil society organizations tried to deal with this?
They have very, very little options, quite frankly. There's been a systematic targeting of NGOs and civil society organizations that do work which the government deems to be unfriendly or critical. So, the range of targeted organizations extends from one of India's most prestigious think tanks, the Center for Policy Research, or CPR, which today is virtually on the brink of shutdown because the government has squeezed all of its foreign funding and has also made it virtually impossible for it to raise money within India, and has also now filed criminal charges. I don't think any of those charges can be sustained when this matter finally is put to trial, but that's many years away. And by then, CPR will perhaps have shut down. So CPR is one prominent example of a targeted organization. Harsh Mandar, who's a very prominent and highly regarded rights activist in India, his NGOs he works in the field of child rights, communal harmony, and he has been targeted with multiple cases. Dalit rights organizations in Gujarat and elsewhere have had their funding cut off. So it's across the board. There's pressure, and the government is very keen to manage the functioning of NGOs. It's interesting. I was talking to one NGO in the sort of I don't want to mention the sector, but in a particular sector, and they told me how funding in from virtually every Western donor had become difficult because the government was insisting on a case-by-case scrutiny of funds that come in from conventional donors like the Ford Foundation or whatever. The only Western donor which is allowed freely to operate is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So somehow the Gates Foundation has a good relationship with the Modi government. I don't know why. So they are able to operate relatively unhindered. And those organizations that get money from the Gates Foundation seem to manage fine. But others are running into trouble. So I think there's a complex politics at play here. But broadly, it reflects the paranoia of the government that you have that donors are somehow interfering in India's internal affairs, in India's politics. They are quite happy to allow money to come in for their temple projects and all these other things. Then there's no worry about foreign funding. But when it comes to women's rights or Dalit rights, public health, it's becoming increasingly difficult for NGOs to get funding. So NGOs are really civil society organizations. NGOs, in some ways, are facing even more of a threat than the media, because all of them basically rely on external funding, or the bulk of them rely on external funding. whereas most Indian, I mean, the foreign funding law in India, fortunately, prohibits Indian media from getting. So if you're a non-profit in the media space, you are not allowed to get any kind of foreign funds. You can't even apply for it, right? So in a way, by disallowing foreign funding, they have removed one element of vulnerability from the media. And so, I mean, that's not prevented them from finding other ways to harass. But I would say NGOs have a particularly difficult time right now, civil society organizations.
I have many more questions, but I think it's time for others to be asking those questions. Anyone from the floor?
It's just a reflection from yesterday and today's discussion. I remember you mentioned yesterday that for strategy, how you take as a journalist in repression of time. In your book, Gujarat, I haven't read the book, but I remember I read the op-ed and also the comment by Karan Thapar, where he mentioned that this book does not give you answer of all your questions, but it takes you through all the evidences and data and theories that helps you to decide. The strategy of in a repressed time, do you think is same for you today? Because the book was quite some time back. Because you mentioned about the Pegasus is the same. You researched, you made it available, and others actually took it to the court.
Yeah, I mean, I think the environment. Look, if you're going to document facts as they unfold, and if you're going to be telling the truth about what's happening, the environment is pretty much always going to be quite hostile. When me and my co-authors did the book on Gujarat in 2002, it was literally months after the killings had happened, and when Narendra Modi was chief minister. And Modi was CM in Gujarat, and it was a BJP government at the center, Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. And they were in power till 2004. And the book came out in 2002. But what was different then was that there was a lot of documentation about the Gujarat riots that had been prepared by a central body, a national body like the National Human Rights Commission. In fact, the NHRC played a stellar role in educating the public about the truth of what had happened in Gujarat, the partisanship of the police, and the way in which Muslims were targeted for massacre. And it was largely because of the NHRC's intervention that many of the cases related to the Gujarat riots, which the Gujarat police had been suppressing, got handed over to external investigating agencies. By external, I mean non-Gujarat. And finally, you actually had prosecutions and convictions, which would never have happened if matters had been left in Mr. Modi's hands. So you could say that that environment was somewhat more permissive. Today, it's unthinkable for the National Human Rights Commission to take this kind of a position. I don't think the NHRC bothered to investigate the Delhi riots of 2020. The NHRC has been silent about the killings in Manipur. The NHRC has been silent about house demolitions. Instead, the NHRC will pick up on incidents of individual violence that happen in opposition states and say that we're going to send a fact-finding mission there. So Mr. Modi as PM has managed to do what he couldn't as CM, which is to ensure that independent constitutional bodies or independent agencies do not function as independent agencies. And he has also managed to a certain extent what he couldn't do in 2002. And Shahidul Bhai mentioned yesterday that one interview that Mr. Modi gave back in 2002 to the BBC, when he was basically refusing to accept any responsibility for the killings. So the BBC reporter said, well, is there anything that you would have done differently? And he says, yes, we would have learned how to control the media. I think the word he uses, manage the media. He didn't say control, to manage the media. And I think that's a lesson he's learned. 90% of the media is very well managed by Mr. Modi. And he continues to manage to the extent to which a BBC documentary, which was based on what happened in 2002 and which included his interviews, he managed to disappear that interview. Today, if you look for it online, you won't find it. You won't find it on YouTube. You won't even find it in the Internet Archive or the Wayback Machine. And he managed to prevail on the BBC not to, so BBC also has not put it up online. Most BBC programs you can find on YouTube or somewhere or the other. Not this one. Managing the, you can say this creates difficulties, but you can't be intimidated by that. And so today, if the HRC is not doing the work it's meant to do, that doesn't matter. We have to do that work as journalists. And I would say I'm very proud to be part of a decent-sized, group of journalists. I think our ranks probably number hundreds, if not thousands, across the country. Individuals, small organizations, freelancers, photographers, cartoonists, who, at great risk to themselves, are documenting what is happening. So you have an incident in Madhya Pradesh, in Harda, where a firecracker factory, which was not following any of the regulations, had an accident which led to the death of, I think, 14 people and the destruction of the homes of many people. And it was half a day's news, or maybe half a minute's news nationally when it happened. But there are two or three freelance kids who are living around there, who are documenting the aftermath, how the victims are not being compensated, how the administration is behaving callously towards them, the hardship that these families are going through. So there are people out there who are documenting, and that's why I think it's great that you have an institution like the Pathshala training journalists, because in the emerging media landscape, something that our professor said yesterday, right? That, I mean, he's right and he's wrong. He said that the era of big media is over, and I think it's still possible, and we should not give up that. Like, we aspire for the Wire to be bigger and bigger, and that others like us will also thrive. But he's right insofar as the ability for highly localized reports to capture what is happening and then for it to be disseminated is also, this is also a part of our, it's a part of the media landscape. And so I think, the fact that, phones can record broadcast quality video now, what it requires is a little bit of training on the part of the person who's trying to make a report, so that you put together something that's well considered, balanced, well made. And in India, we have thousands of such people in every state. J&K, for example, despite the repression, I'm always astonished at the kind of pictures that we get of stories from J&K, which look at different aspects of the ugly political reality of the state, including of custodial torture, even though the reporter who's filing the story knows that after the story appears, chances are that they will be called by special branch and said, "Ki bhai, why did you do the story?" and warned in other ways not to do it again. So there is a cadre of freelancers who, despite the repression, despite lack of institutional support, are doing that work. So I would say that things are difficult compared to the past, but not so difficult that we can't do what we're trying to do.
Thank you.
I don't think it's ever too difficult to do what we need to be doing, but I'm jealous. Our NHRC certainly has not played the role your NHRC
Never
has.
ever?
Never ever, not to my knowledge. Any other questions?
You've been talking about managed media in India, and we know that commonly it's been referred as Modi media or Godi media. And here we have like Unnayan, Sangbadikota, like development journalism, big bridges journalism, metro rail journalism, all sorts of that. But and over the years, at least for the last 10 years in Bangladesh, and I think it goes same for India, that we have been witnessing a very unique formation of or version of embedded journalism in India and Bangladesh or in South Asia. And that's what we have been talking about we have discussed that yesterday and even today, what you're talking about. What I'm particularly interested to know more from you is that what is the gender and sexual politics of that managed media?
So I would say that, again, I would break it down into 2 or 3 parts. If the government wants to fix somebody, then they would rather come up with some kind of financial allegations, this sort of thing, and that's what they do. But about 4 years ago, during the Me Too movement, a lot of examples came to the fore of sexual harassment at the media workplace, in the newsrooms. And the most prominent example which came out at the time involved a gentleman called M.J. Akbar, who used to be editor of The Telegraph, then he was editor of Asian Age, and he used to be in the Congress party many years ago, was an MP also, and then about 10 years ago joined the BJP and was an MP when these allegations surfaced. And one by one, victims of Mr. Akbar came forward to testify. And they testified after a prominent victim of his, a senior woman reporter called Priya Ramani, after she wrote a column where she brought his name out in a kind of, I don't know if she directly named him or not, but it left people with no illusions as to who she was referring to. And after she did her story, then the number of victims came forward with much more direct allegations. And instead of well, I'm not sure what options he had, quite frankly, but he made the mistake of filing a defamation case against Priya Ramani. So that was the only time that Me Too allegations in the newsroom got tested in a court of law. And the outcome did not favor Mr. Akbar. He lost his case. He claimed that Priya Ramani had defamed him by alleging that he was a sexual predator. And the court concluded that she had not defamed him, which, of course, then leaves the conclusion for everybody to be drawn as to what exactly he was. And but there are other examples also of this. And then, unfortunately, this was largely, even in the West, this was episodic, or rather, it was short-lived. So Hollywood had an epiphany where some of the worst predators got exposed. But I don't think anybody has any illusions that sexual harassment at the workplace has ended. Every newspaper and media house is required, like any company in India, is required to have a sexual harassment committee in place. And the details of its membership and procedures have to be publicized to all staff. And I would like to believe that most large organizations do follow that rule. Perhaps some don't. So this is one aspect in response to your question. Regrettably, many managements chose to kind of soft pedal or ignore the Me Too allegations when they came up and didn't treat them with the kind of seriousness that they required. The other aspect of the media management, well, sort of the gendered nature of media management. I'm not sure I'd put it that way, but like you have gender imbalance in the newsroom. Of course, women, if you look at different marginalized sections, religious minorities, women, Dalits, Adivasis, women who comprise 50% of the population probably have a reasonably respective percentage of representation in the newsroom, maybe 20, 25%. I'm not sure if I've seen any studies, but I would say rule of the thumb, you have somewhat, I wouldn't say reasonable, but you have kind of semi-respectable representation of women in the newsroom in many large organizations. But if you look at women in positions of authority, taking editorial decisions or heading news organizations, there are very few. And this is changing somewhat, but still, I would say you can count on the fingers of one hand the number of women who have edited or who are editing national news organizations. So it's so there is gross underrepresentation at that level. Of course, when it comes to Adivasis and Dalits or Muslims, the underrepresentation is much more severe, particularly as you go up the food chain. You'll find zero representation of Dalits or Adivasis at that level. But even their presence in the newsroom is very, very, very low.
Part of what I was trying to get at is that are there the government strategies or the big media strategies where they use sexual politics or gender politics to in their the way the big media works.
Yes. Okay.
For example, let me give an example from 2018. Right before the election, there was this one talk show where they had this very senior barrister who has support for the opposition party, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and he was in a talk show online, and two young journalists from that particular TV channel, they riled him up to the point that I'm not justifying what he had said to that woman, but the whole thing was set up in a way, the talk show was that they could target him and show him, cast him as a misogynist man. And he, of course, fell for the trap, being the patriarchal man he is. And the next morning, the woman journalist went and filed a case, defamation case, and then there were like 400 defamation case, and then in 48 hours the guy was in jail. Incidentally, Shahidul was also in jail at the time. So that's sort of like appropriation of feminist logic, appropriation of sexual normative sexual ideas when in the operation of media. Especially the embedded media.
I understand. No, I don't know of instances of this kind. But of course, I would say in the wider, I'll make two observations. One is that in the wider politics of the BJP, there is an attempt to use gender to paint themselves in a good way, but that doesn't work at all. Like so. For example, when they abolished triple talaq, this was presented as a great victory, a great gift to Muslim women. But when Muslim women protested the Citizenship Amendment Act, it was the Bharatiya Janata Party that was the most vicious in attacking them. And the BJP, they have this phrase, Beti Padhao, Beti Bachao. Educate your girls, daughters, and save them. But when in Haryana, the wrestlers, India's champion wrestlers, women, alleged sexual harassment by a BJP MP, the worst kind of, there was violence rained on them, their complaints were not taken. The Prime Minister is quite happy to celebrate their victories because he hopes it'll get credit to himself and the BJP. But when they appealed to him to help, he gave them a false assurance and didn't do anything. So there is this kind of use of trying to instrumentalize gender justice, but it falls flat when the government tries to do it. But one thing that I did not mention about managing media, but it's different from what you're asking, is that there is very definite targeting of women journalists who are critical of the establishment. And the form this targeting takes is the most vicious online trolling and targeting. So my colleague Arfa Khanum Sherwani, or there was another independent journalist, Sagrika Ghosh, who's now become an MP, or there's Rana Ayub, who's another independent journalist. Lots of women who are outspoken and critical and if they happen to be women and Muslim, or women and Christian, then they could be subjected to especially nasty kind of targeting. So there is this occupational hazard, which, and I would say about 2 years ago, the Hindutva people circulated a list of Muslim women journalists who they said we are auctioning. So I think they created an app, actually, Bulli Bai or Sulli Bai app, where they had these women's names and their photographs and said, let us put a price as to how much you want to buy. Horrible, horrible. So a case was filed. I think one guy got arrested. We are not sure he's the right guy or he's the only guy. So there is this kind of targeting which is done to kind of force women journalists to take a back seat and not be vocal. And I would say this is the kind of major dimension in which gender comes into play when it comes to managing the media. I see very little of course, there are women anchors who are part of Godi media, who are some of the worst defenders of the regime. But I would say that they are used in exactly the same way as their male counterparts.
I'm Samir Rahman Prima. My question is not regarding on journalism, as you are leading commentator on international politics, so it's regarding on it. As as the largest country in South Asia, India has always had its sphere of influence around it. And you know very well, before the last elections in Bangladesh, India expressed opinion and publicly to media to see the Awami League government under the leadership of Sheikh Hasina. And they never have made it a secret. So how do you see the diplomacy here from both counterpart, and would you like to brief it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that it is the part of statecraft and diplomacy that governments or countries have state-to-state relations. It is never very healthy when the state-to-state relationship is predicated on a party-to-party or leader-to-leader relationship. Unfortunately, Mr. Modi and the BJP openly celebrates this. They talk about his personal diplomacy, that how great he got along with Obama and with Trump and, with different world leaders. This is the public projection of Mr. Modi, that Indian diplomat, that he as an individual is making all the difference. And similarly, they celebrate the idea that he is very close to and very friendly with Sheikh Hasina. And in the BJP's, and here it's interesting that in domestic politics, the BJP actually vilifies Bangladesh and Bangladeshis. Mr. Amit Shah made the famous or infamous statement about 4 years ago, virtually referring to Bangladeshi migrants as termites, dimak. So there is that domestic politics, but at the state-to-state level, there is a lot that Mr. Modi and BJP have invested in their relationship with Sheikh Hasina. And I would say that this is not unique to Bangladesh. In the Maldives, it was very clear that India was backing the gentleman who lost the election, not Mr. Muizu who won. In Nepal also, India has played favorites. And many leaders who want to strengthen themselves domestically in Nepal feel that the way to do that is to curry favor with New Delhi. This is a highly unhealthy situation and a very dangerous one for Indian statecraft, because what it means is that you're holding state-to-state relations hostage to the internal politics of a country. And in a way, you are laying the ground for India to have a stake in the perpetuation of a certain kind of rule, even if it means violating democracy. Because you know that having invested in, say, Sheikh Hasina, you do not want a situation where she loses power. So, I think that this is unhealthy and dangerous. And in the long run, even in the short run, because change is inevitable. People, we know that in politics, the public sentiment finds its level eventually. And when that inevitable change happens, the consequences for India in that kind of a situation may not be very good. So I think this is a problem, and there are other factors too. Like one of the great fears that the Indian establishment has is that the Chinese influence in Bangladesh is increasing. Similarly, in Myanmar, India earlier had backed the democratic government. Then after the coup, we were in a dilemma. But then the government said, no, Chinese are backing the generals, so we cannot afford to alienate the generals. So there is some of this kind of paranoid politics that also is operating. But fundamentally, I think the point you are making is a valid one, which is that for India to be so invested in the success of one leader is not healthy. And it goes against the spirit of actual deep bilateral relations, which should be regime agnostic. And I'll give you an example. Like in India, for example, in India, I would say India-US relations are regime agnostic when it comes to the US and also in India. Whether Democrats win or Republicans, the relationship with India is still on a very good footing. And whether Congress wins or BJP, from the US point of view, the trajectory is very even and on the upward swing. And that's an example of relations that are not conditioned on one political party or the other winning. It's unfortunate that even there, Mr. Modi in Texas, he made this infamous statement, कि अगली बार, he used that phrase, "Ab ki baar Trump sarkar," right? Which was a blatant kind of urging Indians to back Trump, which is foolish because Indians in America generally tend to back the Democrats. That's a separate issue. But I'm saying even there, Mr. Modi did not understand that it is not his personal endorsement of a leader that is going to help India, but the fact that there is a strong bilateral relationship that is independent of which political party or leader is in power. That matters. And I think he needs to look at Bangladesh in the same way, that investing in one leader, one party is not a healthy recipe for healthy bilateral.
Then if we look at the border, the both sides in the government says that the relationship Dhaka-New Delhi is very historic, very close to each other. So why BSF is constantly killing in the border, shooting Bangladeshi people, and there is no killing like this on the border of two friendly, I think, in the world, two friendly countries in the world. So what do you think? Why BSF is not listening to India government, or what the reason behind this?
See, I'm not an expert on border management of India-Bangladesh, but I would say that there are all kinds of complexities that have to do with traditional, in any situation you draw a boundary and you fence it. The tendency will be to protect that with bullets, and you have some smuggling and some lumpen elements that are active in the border. So there's all kinds of reasons why I'm not surprised that this kind of thing is happening. But responsible governments have to make sure that this kind of situation does not arise. If India and China, who fought a war in 1962, could survive all the way till 2021, Galwan. In fact, the last time shots were fired before Galwan was probably in early 70s. So there was a good 40-year period when even between these two hostile countries that have claims on each other's border were careful not to be shooting. So there's no reason why people should be killed on the border. It's very, very unfortunate. Sadly,
we have zero tolerance agreement, but nobody listens.
I mean, in fact, I think things are probably going to get. I saw a news item in the Hindu the other day, where the BSF was saying that the entire fault is on BDR, that they are not taking protective steps, and what can we do? We are often, and they mentioned some list of BSF people who had been attacked and injured by smugglers. So they said we have no options. I would say the truth is somewhere. I mean, it's neither black nor white. Probably you'll have to look at each and every incident. I remember covering the Boraibari killing, in which 7 or 8 Indian BSF Jawans were killed, and that caused a lot of consternation back at that time. So there is a history, there is a context, but there's no reason why. And you would expect that if Modi and Sheikh Hasina are so close, and if India and Bangladesh have all these plans on the economic side, connectivity, etc., why they cannot solve this issue, is a bit of a mystery. Maybe there is an interest in also keeping tension going at that local level. And I will also add that another thing which, you see, an eternal source of tension in domestic politics in India has to do with the question of Bangladeshi migration. There are no numbers. It is a fact that you have Bangladeshi labor working in different cities in India. It is a fact that probably many of them are undocumented. The question you have to ask is, why are they undocumented? A good reason is that India, see, in other situations, you have a work permit system. There is an attempt to embrace the political economy of labor flows, and say, how do I regulate this? A Bangladeshi migrant who comes to India to work, and probably there are Indian migrants who are coming here also, but a Bangladeshi migrant who comes to India to work doesn't necessarily go there with a view to settling down and becoming an Indian. But because there is no regulatory system, the only way to protect himself or herself from police harassment and evictions is to acquire a voting card, acquire an Aadhaar card, acquire a ration card, so that you can at least say, look, I'm legitimate, mujhe mat maro, mujhe mat bhagao. But once a Bangladeshi gets a voting card, then the BJP will say, look, this is an example. Even the language that we use, Bangladeshi migrants are called infiltrators. An infiltrator is actually a guy who is crossing the border with a gun with a view to shooting somebody. That's what the word infiltrator conjures in my mind. But even the language that we use is so security-centric that the public mind is conditioned to treating Bangladeshis as a security threat. And that also plays into the communal politics of BJP. So I would say that if indeed Modi and Sheikh Hasina have such a good relationship, there is no reason why they can't solve some of these issues. Why can't you have a...
So would you like to piece this story for the world? Because we want to know the mystery, the border killing. We don't have, all we have the Godi media, you know. We don't have any independent media in here. So
Yeah,
I want to know about the mystery.
Yeah, I mean, like in the sense that like our resources are quite limited in terms of the stories we are able to cover. And right now, of course, the focus is because the Indian election is coming. So those are, most of our priorities are fixed there. But you're right. I mean, like this is an area that we should pay attention to. Perhaps we have not done more than a couple of stories on situation, and most of it would be quite perfunctory probably. We haven't done any in-depth, but I'll be quite happy to collaborate with colleagues here to see if we could do some kind of a reporting project to better understand why this problem of border killings is happening. First of all, have an accurate count of the total number of casualties and try to break them down, do a systematic reporting project so that there is a report that then policymakers can be told to look at. It's not as if there are, not reasonable people. They exist everywhere, and if we are able to give a well-documented report about this, it's possible that it could have some impact. So yeah, this is something that we would definitely like to do.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Oh, I had several questions. Okay, so that to get back to what Saidia was asking, and I think I would like to carry on from that point. I think it's particular to Bangladesh that the media is not only embedded, but embedded in ways that sections of the managed media play a very proactive role in crushing dissent. So there have been instances, talk shows are were more popular, but so there have been instances where TV channels, private TV channels, and it's very interesting that private TV channels are far more, it's like, the being more Catholic than the Pope, are far more carry forward the government agenda and the ruling party agenda than the state media is able to. They're far more creative. So to get back to the instance I was talking about is that there is, talk shows are popular, and one private TV channel had invited a guest, an opposition leader, to take part in a talk show, and he was arrested as he left. And there is reason to believe that this was deliberate. So there are instances, and you can sort of tell from the movements and the tremors and stuff that we have reason to believe that the media, sections of the media work very closely with the intelligence agencies. And there are shared, let's say, ways of nabbing people, of smearing, conducting smearing campaigns. What you had said earlier about women broadcasters, I mean, the culture is misogynist. So, of course, there are women who are forerunners of the Awami League, the government propaganda machinery, and are subjected to trolling and vicious slandering and stuff online. There is that. But also the role they play in serving the government agenda, or the media is actually, it's like it's a part of the government, a part of the ruling party, a part of intelligence agencies. And that leads me to my next question, and I would like to know whether it's the same in India, whether there is reason to think it happens in India. And my next question is there a deep state in India?
The Godi media is politically highly compromised and closely sticks to the government's agenda and often works to extend it, and will tailor its reporting and its discussions to what is convenient for the BJP. This is very clear. And you have individual anchors. Some are much worse than others. Some try to be somewhat objective. I was pleasantly surprised in one of the Godi channels to come across an anchor who was at least allowing the opposition to speak. And That's quite rare. And what they do also is that they fill, I don't know if you have the same situation in Bangladesh, but they will fill the screen with 12 boxes, and all of whom are shouting, screaming, and the anchor is sort of adjudicating, and those who criticize the government are humiliated and abused. Many of these, exactly, and many of these discussions tend to focus on bogus Hindu-Muslim issues, and invariably these Godi channels will pick up 3 or 4 highly regressive Maulanas, and they will be presented as sort of spokespersons of the Muslims. And you will have equally backward characters from the Hindu religion who will then speak out for the Hindus. And so you have a god-awful mess. But the agenda is to drive what the government wants. I don't think the intelligence agencies are involved in this. Many of these channels get their instructions from the Prime Minister's office or from the BJP. And there is some evidence of a centralized process of narrative building. We've seen examples of some certain WhatsApp messages from an individual in the PMO suggesting a certain line of attack on a particular topic, etc. So there is some centralized attempt at narrative building. I wouldn't say that this is linked to the agencies. The way the agencies operate is, if there is a story involving, let's say, I mentioned the one case yesterday, the deportation of this academic, Natasha Kaul, or if there's, say, a story with foreign policy. Yeah, or Manipur, exactly. So you would have certain kind of information planted by security officials or agency officials. And that tends to happen on a one-to-one, not at an industrial level. So they would probably have individual reporters that they've cultivated who will then go out and give this narrative. That's as far as the agencies go. Your question about, in fact, I don't see any distinction between their use of female and male reporters or editors. They seem to be quite agnostic about it. And frankly, I've come across a situation where they've tried to, it's not difficult to get Indian politicians to say things because that's the whole mindset. But I haven't come across those kinds of examples. But on the question of, that's a fascinating question you ask about, is there a deep state? And, I would say that perhaps not in the conventional sense, not in the sense that we speak and know of the deep state, say, in Pakistan or the US, where you have, in Pakistan, for example, the deep state would be the establishment, GHQ, or the core commanders, who pull the strings as far as the judiciary and the civil administration is concerned, or the US, which has a deep state at a certain level. I would say that the deep state in the US ensures that, say, the interests of the military-industrial complex are protected at all costs, but even there, it's not as if the deep state can necessarily subvert or direct decisions or outcomes at the relatively micro level. We saw the California court judgment last month, where the judge, he was a federal judge, who clearly ruled that what was happening in Gaza was genocide. But he says, under US law, I'm powerless to do anything. And he was right. So you have that level of, I suppose 250 years of institutional autonomy and integrity produces these kinds of things. We don't have that in our part of the world. In India, what you identify as the establishment, say, in Bangladesh or Pakistan, which is the head of the military, the intelligence agencies, I would say have actually come under the thumb of the BJP. If there is any one deep state or establishment in India, today I would say it is the RSS. Or I would say it's the cabal, the Modi, Amit Shah cabal, because they are in some ways stronger than even the RSS. Tomorrow if the RSS tells Modi, please go, he won't go. He'll probably have them arrested. That's his power. Of course, it'll never come to that. And what this deep state has managed to do is to get professors appointed. So if you look at appointments across the board in many Indian universities over the last 4 or 5 years, most of the people getting jobs are those who have affiliations to the RSS. We've seen examples of judges getting appointed who have links. And these are going to be, and the reason I'm calling this the deep state is because tomorrow when Mr. Modi is not in power, and when the BJP is not in power, that guy who brought into the judiciary today at the age of 45 or 46 will 20 years from now be in a position where he's deciding the appointments of other judges. That lecturer hired today, 20 years from now would be head of a selection committee, recruiting professors to JNU. So this ability to play the long game is, I think, what makes the RSS, so I would say that this is the deep state. And today you have a situation where military officers who are normally said to be part of the deep state, right? In a place like Pakistan or perhaps Bangladesh, military officers are currying favor with RSS. They are turning up at RSS events and giving talks. The government pushes something politically, and the army brass is not resisting, even when they know it's against the army's interest. Case in point, last year the government introduced something called Agniveer. These are, so in other words, every year if the government used to recruit 30,000 or 40,000 Jawans, soldiers, the government unilaterally decided that 1/3 of these guys will now be temporary employees. Sorry, 2/3 will be temporary. And after 3 years, they'll be booted out. The military brass felt that this was a terrible idea. How do we know that? Because the guy who was army chief when this was pushed has retired and written a book. And a chapter of his which got leaked says very clearly that we thought this was a bad idea. So the government promptly had the book recalled, saying that under various service rules, and I don't think the book will see the light of day until after the elections, if at all. So here you have a situation where the brass or your intelligence chiefs are currying favor with the ruling establishment. So that's why I'm not, the concept of deep state in the Indian context perhaps needs a rethink. And people often abroad ask me, they say Putin and Erdogan and Orban and Netanyahu and Modi, they're all the same. They're all kind of authoritarian, which they are. But I say the difference is that Modi is the only guy who has a 100-year-old mass organization backing him, which is the RSS, founded in 1925, and which has its fingers in every pie in the country. If Putin had that, he would be completely, even more out of control than he is right now. But this is something which is unique and what makes the Indian situation that much more dangerous.
One last question, if I may, Shwetal.
Yeah.
How visible is RAW in India, and how validated publicly is whatever it does?
So RAW is not visible.
I think RAW is more visible in Bangladesh than in India.
I've heard the stories, but there was a rare moment of visibility for RAW in a sense. But let me put it this way. In the last 3 or 4 years, the government has acted in a somewhat reckless manner globally. There was the abduction of the Dubai princess on the high seas. She was handed over to her father. There was the attempted kidnapping of an Indian fugitive in Antigua in the Caribbean. And there is the allegation that a Sikh activist in Surrey, British Columbia, was shot dead by assassins linked to the Indian intelligence agency. And there is an indictment in the New York federal court of an Indian national currently in detention in Prague and soon to be extradited, that he operated on the basis of instructions from an Indian agency to plan this killing. So this has brought kind of raw kind of publicity and visibility that it perhaps didn't want, all of these incidents. But otherwise, as an agency, you hear and see very little of it. The Intelligence Bureau is more involved in domestic matters, in the sense that their remit is domestic intelligence gathering. And the IB is also involved in developing, of course, RAW also develops intelligence that is supposed to be used as inputs in counter-terror and so on. But you don't see, I mean, outside, in Kashmir, people know about IB and RAW because you have officers who are stationed there. But in the rest of India, I would say that the footprint is not very visible at all. And there's been some Bollywood movies that have attempted to paint a profile for, glorify and also to show out. Well, I mean, it's sort of, in fact, there's a movie, I saw it recently, Khufia, exactly, which has Bangladeshi, India kind of, which I would say it shows RAW in a somewhat mixed light, that you have double agents who are active and doing terrible things and betraying the country. And, you know, so it's kind of, it's like many say, you know, American spy movies. Yeah, of course. I mean, that is there. But, you know, within India itself, in terms of public activities, there is, you know, you will mostly never hear about them, or let alone see them.
Interruption in Bangladesh election, your criticism was only to Modi government. Modi government take the credits. But in 2014, Sujata Singh did what we see. And that time, Congress was in power. Can we say that who is in power in Delhi? That is not fact. India always wants to control our election system. Can we say that? It is my one question. Another one is, one perception is going on that India wants Sheikh Hasina in power because of chicken neck to save their 7 sisters. Such a huge amount of number of people denying that, I can say like that, India denying such a huge number of people's voting right, and is it harm India in long term?
Okay, so I would say, you know, I'm not an expert of Bangladesh elections. Have only seen them from afar, and I'm familiar with the allegations of the elections here being rather less than free and fair, and not just this time around, but earlier too. And I would say that there is, of course, there is continuity. You know, India's foreign policy towards Bangladesh for the longest time has been centered around support for Awami League. This is not a secret. When BNP was in power, relations were quite bad. And India saw BNP and the BNP Jamaat alliance as a security threat. So there is all of this history going back last 25 years. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm saying that doesn't matter. I mean, Sujata Singh was foreign secretary from the earlier government, and but my point is that there is continuity in policy, and government of India has always favored AL because for a variety. I don't think chicken neck is the issue. I think there tends to be a great exaggeration about that. I don't think there is any great threat to chicken neck or to the unity and integrity of India's northeast. Sometimes we hear that China is the threat to chicken neck, and it's not. I don't think that's a factor. I think there's probably, in fact, I would say, and I don't think security interests are a factor. I'm increasingly inclined towards the belief that probably political economy factors are more and more important, that Indian big business sees a great opportunity. See, Bangladesh is one of the large economies of the world with huge potential here, and there's a lot that Indian companies would like to do, and probably that is what is driving a lot of the Modi government's approach and earlier government's approach as well. On the question of frankly, this is a question I've been asking all the Bangladeshi colleagues I've met, that the Indian role in subverting democracy or elections, in the sense that frankly, most Indians will be quite surprised. Many will be quite impressed that Narendra Modi or the Indian government wields that kind of influence here as to manipulate an entire election. Probably the manipulation is being done by the government here. And it is doing so because it's confident that India will support it, China will support it. And to that extent, this is a very negative role that India is playing. But at the end of the day, responsibility for manipulating an election has to rest on those who are doing the actual manipulation. Of course, to the extent to which they have external supporters, then that's a bad thing. But insofar as you're saying, is it Congress or BJP? I would say it doesn't make too much of a difference. But having said that, there is a certain amount of recklessness in the Bharatiya Janata Party's approach to foreign policy. And I think that is quite damaging to India's national interest in the long term.
I'm sorry, I can't take another one, but we can have conversations afterwards anyway, because it's already gone way beyond what we'd anticipated. Thank you, Siddharth, very, very much for being here with us, for sharing your wisdom and sharing your knowledge. I hope, as you talked about and others yesterday also talked about, that solidarity is something we are able to hang on to. And I hope perhaps in the coming days, we can actually talk in concrete terms in what we might be able to do together. Thank you.
Thank you.